and here with Batya Ungar-Sargon. Batya.
Michael.
Seriously, I gotta say something very quickly. There's a lot to say on this. First, want to say, I don't know why I'm following the people I follow on Twitter. We have nothing in common. It was the people, this is the last one I saw right before we came back, ladies and gentlemen. That is some good speechifying. Does anyone, am I missing something about this? Because right at the end there, and maybe I should do that to punctuate this point, I should speak very loud. That is the thing that means you're very passionate. Batya, what did you think about that? You have notes.
I have notes.
Scribbling furiously like the Zodiac killer. You're a little out of your mind. I thought it was a bad speech overall. Uninspired, pablum, the whataboutism, the both sides of Israel, etc. I didn't get much out of it, but what do you think?
Okay, well, let's start by summarizing the top themes of the speech. Like, what would you say were the main, two or
Well,
three
I was
things
surprised that it was the first acceptance speech in history that mentioned elder abuse. That was a weird, aside. She's like, I'm really going to do something about it.
Elder abuse is real.
I know, but is that a big vote getter? But what did I think?
Seniors vote, man.
Of course, there's the top of that speech, which is all biographical. Mm-hmm. Fine, but, it's kind of, I thought it was kind of boring. You thought it was kind of condescending. Let's get back to that. But the rest of it, there's not a ton in there, I think, policy-wise. But one of the things I think is really interesting about it was taking credit for things as the vice president. For instance, she took over foreign policy. I flew to Zelensky and warned him. He clearly had no idea until Kamala Harris showed up. And then the border, too. As she wasn't a border czar.
Right.
And apparently that's a nomenclature thing. She wasn't a border czar, but then she had responsibility for the border. So taking that credit where I don't think any credit is deserved. And then on the other stuff is look, the Donald Trump stuff, Donald Trump does himself no favors. If we're watching this speech and you're not looking at your phone, which is probably a bad idea, you should be looking at your phone because it's more interesting than the speech. Donald Trump was tweeting, right? He's now back. Mm-hmm. And the two things that I saw, and this shows you the opponent that he's up against, was one thing about Tim Walz being the assistant coach. This is during the speech. And the second thing was, where's Hunter Biden? I mean, this is your opponent. I mean, he's an unserious person. That bit is actually true. But I think as far as substance, there was not a ton. Tell me what you think. You have a lot of notes.
First of all, those two comments by Trump. Let's just be real here. Trump is the real brat. I said it. I said what I said.
You are so fucking MAGA. It's unbelievable. Yeah.
All right. All kidding aside, I came into this convention with a very open mind. I really did. I loved the speech she gave on economic populism from a left-wing point of view. I did not agree with her solutions, but I felt that the Democrats...
They were not communist enough for you?
We're trying to do a course correction away from catering to the over-credentialed college elites and returning to their roots in the working class. And I thought this is going to be an election fought on policy, on whether we do the Trumpian sort of populist model, protectionist model, or whether we go with the Democrats' redistributionist model. But either way, we're getting some version of communism, and so I was in a great
Both of
mood.
those models are a fucking disaster, okay? But yeah.
The whole DNC was, obviously very heavy on vibes, very little substance. There was nothing there that a struggling working class person
I think that's right.
could say, this is what is going to make my life materially, measurably better tomorrow, the way that at almost every minute of the DNC, of the RNC, that was being hammered home. But, we're sitting here laughing about this, but there is actually something unbelievably insulting to the American people about getting up there and spending half an hour talking about your family when people are choosing between feeding their children chicken for dinner and being able to drive them to church on Sunday. It is an insult to have an entire convention and not have any policy, any agenda, anything to tell people, choose me because I'm going to make your life better. Instead, all we get is for the people, and we're supposed to take that on faith. And in fact, some of the quotes even reflect that. She's like, let us show the world and each other that we're going to be better. Okay, how? Let us uplift the middle class. Okay, how? Let us secure the border. How? There is something so unbelievable insulting, and going in there in the state that America is in and just asking people to take it for granted that you're going to do these things. And so I'm actually really upset about it.
I can tell.
And the way that everything is defined in opposition to Trump, everything. There is nothing outside of Trump. There is no American people outside of Trump. There is no real feeling for who are these people who we are going to serve. And I think that is the real fundamental failure here. There is no concept of service here. And yeah, you could talk about Trump's personality. You can talk about how he talks. You could talk about how he tweets. The RNC was extremely heavy on service. How are we going to serve the American people? And I think that this is outrageous.
On a few of these points, some viewers who know me will know that I am absolutely no fan of Donald Trump, or quite the opposite. But these are the moments that, because they force you into these positions, that one has to sound like Sean Hannity or something. When I see the media class on Twitter, many of whom are within the hall, saying, you know, this is a inspirational speech, this is overwhelming me, and blah, 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 which is projection. I mean, you want it to be that, and you're making it that in your own head and on your own Twitter feed. But things that, you know, I was making notes on my phone. You have a pen and paper, but I saw, these are just a couple things. One was amazing, an enormous, rapturous applause for "the future is worth fighting for." Unbelievable cliche and pablum that means nothing, as you said. It is worth fighting for. I mean, well, you're talking a lot about the past, but the future is worth fighting. We're not going to go back, but with the future. Like, these are bad political cliches. The armed mob on January 6th, very much a stretch, right? I mean,
that's not a stretch, that's a lie.
Okay.
Not
the
one
other
of
one,
those people
so
is
these are the things that kind of stuck out to me. I mean, the Project 2025 stuff doesn't surprise me because they're seeing that this is polling well, in the sense that Project 2025, no one knows what it is when they're asked by pollsters, but it sounds fairly sinister. Are you against Project 2025? Probably. I think I probably am. It's a white paper that is 950 pages long that Trump has denounced. Rejected.
Totally rejected.
Because if you know anything about DC, that's what think tanks do. They get checks from Pfizer and Amazon and whatever, and then they write white papers. And this is one that was kind of silly in certain points, and Trump denounced it as extremist. The two things, and I'm wondering if you can enlighten me on this, that the Trump will use the active duty military against their own citizens and jail journalists. I don't know what that is a reference to. Do you have any idea?
I think that she's sort of taking the idea of a dictator, which Trump made this joke, I'll be a dictator on day one, and saying, well, what do dictators do? And then presuming he's going to do that. It's total fiction. And on the Project 2025 point, and I'm just going to make this point briefly, and then we want to bring in a few more guests. The Project 2025 point is very important. It's not just that Trump sidelined this project because it's very not brat, actually. It's very annoying, and it's very elitist, and it's produced by elites who do not represent where the average Republican voter is at on social issues like abortion and gay marriage, which they are totally supportive of gay marriage, and they do not want abortion to be banned. It's that he sidelined the elites of his party, both economically, the donor class, which wanted Nikki Haley, and the intelligentsia of his party, which produced Project 2025. And on the reverse side, you look at this DNC, you look at who the Democrats put up on that stage again and again and again, and it's celebrities, glitterati, millionaires, billionaires. The combined income of the people who took the stage at the DNC is probably bigger than that of some small countries. And the entire rationale for why you should vote for Kamala Harris is because these rich people love her. And I just find that to be utterly insulting. And now we want to call in a couple of our friends
yes, we do. And one final thing on this, and I just want to be fair and say that the people at conservative think tanks like Heritage Foundation are also wildly out of touch. I've met and spent a lot of time with them. So, I mean, to your point about abortion and stuff, they're living in a different world. But should we have a couple people?
Nancy
we want our two friends, Nancy Rommelman, who is the host of the brilliant podcast along with Sarah Hepola called Smoke 'Em If You Got 'Em, and Mike Pesca, formerly of Slate, and now of the Gist podcast. Is that right, Mike? Am I remembering that correctly?
You got,
I mean,
I'm got the second part right. The first part I've
I'm surprised I got the first part right and the second part right. I don't listen to your podcast, but I've heard it's great. Guys,
Hi.
you were in this room.
Hi,
You were
guys.
watching this stuff.
Help us bring down the temperature.
Come on, we're like, I don't know why we're
like
so
the
fucking
palate
annoyed.
cleanser, right?
I think everyone else seems to be happy on Twitter.
Well, you're a one-issue voter on elder abuse. Don't
I
you
know,
think that was,
I've always been.
that was to get her out
That
of
was
the...
to get her, yes.
Because, you know, Biden might have a case.
Yes,
I don't know what statute of limitations.
it was elder abuse until she took over,
Yeah, that was... I don't think there was an attempt at a good or memorable line, which isn't so much a criticism. To me, it was an extremely underwhelming speech. I'd say B-, but I've seen her speak a lot. Many of the themes she has said better in the past. I saw the whole convention. So many of the things that she said in the speech were previewed by other speakers at the convention. You can't blame her for that. Most people, if they watch anything, are only going to watch this. So they didn't watch everything else. But I would say she probably went at it like a prosecutor who thought she had a winning case and didn't want to dazzle with rhetoric and didn't want to get in the way of that case. So the ambition ambition of the speech wasn't so grand. The execution wasn't so grand. I was just watching Anderson Cooper saying, well, he wasn't saying on Twitter, but they were saying about him, it was at times muscular, tempered with compassion. I didn't get that at all. I don't know where
these people live.
But, you know, in a sense, I would say anyone inclined to vote for her won't have any second thoughts after that. I think that's what she was hoping for.
And I just want to be clear, and I think that, you know, Batya can chime in, and if I'm speaking for you on this too, is that we have been amazingly generous with people that we wildly disagree with in this DNC, who have done very well, who have gone up there and said, God, you know, even on style points, they've nailed it. You know, I mean, we had Nina Turner here last night. I mean, you are probably closer to Nina politically. I think that she's out to lunch on everything, but you know, she makes an impassioned case, and you're like, man, I don't believe this, but I want to. That's not what I get from this.
She, first of all, I find her to have no charisma at all. She does nothing for me. Like, I'm looking at it like, am I going to get? I don't get that. I hear your point about like, why do we need so much of her personal narrative? We're going to get some of that. They're going to have to give you some of that. But yes, it's too much. I don't expect her to lay out big policy plans because she's got to get a bunch of things in. But it was the word you kept using, pablum. It was just pablum. It was just, we've heard every one of these lines before.
There's a lot of
she spent way too much time on Trump. Don't bother with that. Tell us what you're doing. I don't find her interesting at all. So.
Yeah. And by the way, on the Trump stuff, I mean, there's plenty of stuff to run against. He's an absolute gift to a candidate. He's constantly providing them with stuff. And I think we talked about it here. I talked about it today with some of our guests, particularly Matt Welch. The January 6th stuff, the video, amazingly powerful. Yeah. Really well done. Reminds you of how hideous this stuff was in these people that pretend to be patriots, carrying, you know, the police flag and assaulting police with the police flag. That works, right? But you know, the thing is that the ad infinitum on the January 6th stuff, I just think it's like, all right, there's things in the past. I think people want to think of COVID in the past. You know, we talked to Matt about this and Tim Walt. I think the January 6th stuff is not necessarily in the past. We don't want it to be in our future, so therefore, vote against Donald Trump. I understand
so you're saying we're not going back?
We're not going back. We're going to the future. Mike, I'm trying to use their language, right? I don't know how to speak otherwise. But yeah, that stuff, I think there needs to be some sort of limitation on it because it gets the crowd excited. The purpose of an election, though, does it get voters excited?
But was that crowd really super excited?
They are, I think.
It's funny. I kept listening, like for when she would like try to like stick a landing, and I was like, yeah, they're.
I mean, going to the future being the biggest applause line says something about the speech, I think. You know.
Well, that they lucked into, or they orchestrated, cooed their way into, I don't believe that verb, but this, you have one of the greatest, most powerful arguments in American politics and world politics. Where change, he's more of the same. He's backwards, we're the future. It doesn't take a great rhetorician to drive that home. The crowd was driving it home for her, but that is so powerful and probably why she didn't really try to say anything so eloquent. I think on January 6th, you know, she could have pulled out a telling detail and talked about one
It's not mention it.
show.
It's not mention it.
Right, right. Yeah. But she did plod along a bit more, especially since I was at this convention all these days and I've heard every iteration of those examples, and I watched the January 6th hearing, and Kinzinger was there today, and he was better than her on it. So there was a sameness to it, and I think it's safety. I think she was trying to, this whole campaign, they're trying to run out the clock and not do too many interviews, and 77 days left.
Totally. Do you think she comes out of the DNC stronger or weaker than before?
Because it was a really smooth DNC, because you usually do get a little bump because they're talking about you and not talking about him.
Yeah,
and then, and I don't know if this will show up in polls, but I think the only big surprise I got from the DNC, other than a good speech here or there, or, oh, I didn't know that this person was such a good speaker. I didn't know that Mark Kelly was such a bad speaker. Okay. But I came in thinking that Palestinian protesters, and let's get to that, were not the majority of the Democrats, not a big faction. I thought they were meaningful. I thought that they really could affect the Democratic Party. And after their paltry turnout, and I was covered and did a piece on the sit-in with the same version of a histrionic speech, well covered by the media, but 30 delegates out of 4,567. I came out of it thinking, we paid a lot of attention. I understand why. News is something that's different. It was different. It was on college campuses. I think that they are a much smaller faction and a much smaller problem for Democrats than I did going in.
Before we head out, I want to actually turn this on, my co-host here, we take turns asking questions. But I'm sitting there watching this, and I'm like, what the hell is Batya thinking about this? We turned to each other during the first bit of the Israel thing. It was Gone Girl. It was like, oh, we're going to do a plot twist in the middle. And it's like, oh shit, she's going all like, Israel has a right to this, has a right to defend herself. We should, fund them and
Golda Meir.
Yeah, exactly. Golda Meir. And it was, the Jabotinsky version of the speech. And then all of a sudden, and she's like, oh, you think then flipped.
Yes.
And then,
I said that to you. I said that every second she spends on Israel, she has to then turn it around and do
Yes.
But
I just want to ask you a question. The cheers.
Yeah.
And was I wrong? The cheers on the Palestinian stuff were much more boisterous and lusty cheers.
So what I noticed, I'm curious what you think about that, especially Nancy, as someone who spent a lot of time outside with the protesters. So inside, first of all, every time ceasefire was mentioned, they also were very careful to mention and bring the hostages home. So the word ceasefire never stood alone without the counterpart, which I think is really smart, but also, as a Jewish person, that made me feel very seen and heard as someone who feels like these things don't have to be in conflict with each other. But the cheering every time the word ceasefire was said was extremely raucous, as if people had this kind of guilty conscience about having sidelined the uncommitted. Nancy, what was your experience being outside at these protesters that to many of us felt like they had sort of fizzled and didn't make good on?
They have fizzled. They have fizzled.
Why? What happened?
So
what was that like? What's your take on
like
that?
all the other reporters that were coming here, I did my legwork beforehand. I talked to the heads of all of the protests and, got their input in the 30,000 and the 270 organizations marching under the umbrella of March on the DNC. And I didn't have a sense that that sounded like a lot to me. But then again, okay, we had a lot of stuff going on in the spring. There was a lot of stuff on college campuses. People told me, we're busing them in. There's car caravans. Maybe so. So we get here, and my first inkling of what was going on was on Sunday when there was like a little press conference, and it was really mingy. Like, it was really small. I wrote that up for a reason, and I was like, okay, well, it's a presser. Like, maybe, okay, they're not going to uplift people. Well, the Monday event, which was supposed to be 30,000, I'm going to be generous. It was 2,000.
Wow.
And it was so unbelievably boring at a certain point, and even for the protesters. And I think, and I've talked about this before, we've seen a lot of protests since 2020. But what was 2020? Why were they protesting in 2020 in the House? They couldn't go out. They couldn't go to a bar. They couldn't get fucked. They were like absolutely, all of a sudden, it was like, ah! And it felt so good, and that carried protesters for a while through George Floyd, and then we had, Roe v. Wade, and then we had Ukraine and everything. That had the energy. But there is now, and then October 7th, like, oh, it's going to be a big thing. There is activism fatigue. And when you go to the same kind of thing and you do the same thing for 4 years, how many times can you hear Intifada, Intifada? They're bored. It's flaccid.
So you don't buy
It's
my
flaccid.
explanation, which is that they really thought they were getting traction inside the DNC, and so that sucked the energy out of the outside, and then the inside turned on them.
I have a different take on that too.
Raphael, I think that because it's very, very easy to spread your message online, and it's so funny, I wrote about this today for a reason. You know, it used to be like, you didn't know where the protests were going on. Like, you had to get some sort of samizdat or like some weird little wink. Now it's like 3 weeks in advance. Oh, here we are, and here's a helpful, like, Google Map link. And it's become kind of corporate rock. And nobody's excited about that.
So funny.
And we saw that last night, the protest last night. There were like 75 people and 72 were arrested. I wound up meeting the police chief today. And I said to him, because they wanted to be, it wasn't like, I got arrested. It was like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm arrested now.
Yeah.
Okay, because the police are really, really bad. And he's like, yeah.
I
We gave them what they
have a
wanted.
very weird theory about this, by the way. I was walking down here, and the protesters were coming out tonight to make their big final push.
It wasn't
They were
big.
going over the top, and it wasn't that many people, but there was enough people there that cameras and the rest of it, and the phalanx of Chicago police, which, by the way, what is there? 75 million Chicago police. And by the way, where the fuck are they the rest of the time? There's like 8,000 murders a day, and there's like 1 million Chicago cops. And these are the guys that are like hired like temp workers?
Yes, no, actually they are. So there's like something
Can
like.
they keep them?
They're actually down. They're below what.
Yeah, I've been reading
but
these
they
things.
brought
So
in
many.
cops from other places, and then the federal government, it was the same with Milwaukee, but gave them $75 million. And I believe, and Matt and I have talked about this, that the feds and the DNC said, you are not going to fuck up this convention. You are going to.
Well, I'll tell you what.
safe.
What the protesters did, and it's an own goal that they're too young and too stupid to understand, is being that kind of paltry, and being that radical. And I don't mean that's like Batya and I, we've talked about this issue. We have many, many friends who disagree with us on this that are Palestinians and the rest of it. These are people like, when I was walking here, the funniest thing that I saw is on the corner. There was a guy for the Communist Party. I guess there's some splinter Communist Party because they had in Verhosha.
They're so powerful.
Yes,
They're so powerful they have to have splinter movements. It's actually two guys that had a disagreement over coffee this morning. They formed a new party. But the guy had a vest on, like a day glow, like a yellow vest, and it said press, and it had a hammer and sickle under it. And he was standing there so lonely. And I wanted to go up to him and be like, yeah, I'll get a quote from you. I'm not going to publish it, but I will. And it's like, I think that it's the own goal in the sense that it's incredibly beneficial to Democrats.
That's the way we
But isn't this beneficial to them in the sense that they're like, this is our party is going to, these radical. There's like 10 people.
So this is a really important. I'm just going to draw out what you just said, and then I want to hear your take on it, and then I think we're going to wrap. But it is the juxtaposition of the radicalness of the language and then the exact opposite in terms of the sort of physicality of how they present because of the safetyist culture that has produced today's leftists.
Right.
I think this is a very weird point.
No justice, no peace, but when's our water break?
I'm going to make a daring point here, but I think it's probably true. When I was out there, these people were up against the ramparts and everything. I looked at the cops, and I looked at them today, too. And what do we know about police forces in major American cities? The majority of them have minority chiefs, and they're majority minority forces, right? The Chicago PD is majority minority force, and an enormous majority, according to just my sort of visual calculations. There is something, I think, that makes these people slink away when they're college radicals and all of them are white, and they're running up against a phalanx of minority working class police officers that they might say, you know what? They say, get the fuck out of this police cordon. And they did. I was there. They did. 4 or 5 people stayed, and they were just arrested or pushed out. And I think that, like, that actually, weirdly, I have no proof of this. It's a hunch that probably has an effect on it.
I'm going to step on you one second just to illustrate that. So I went to the protest on Monday. Tons of Palestinian flags. One guy with an American flag, a white guy. He got tons of shit. I interviewed him. They were coming up to him. There was a black guy running through the protest tonight with an American flag.
No one touched him.
Yeah.
Mike, give us your take.
Well, first of all, what she said, the actual substance was anodyne and fine, and it's not even what she said.
This is going back to Harris's
Yes.
speech and the section on Israel.
What she said, decrying the horrors of Gaza. I think that's not even a Haaretz editorial. That's a Times of Israel editorial. That's fine. It did get bigger cheers because I think that there were a lot of people in the convention center, not the ones outside, not the 30 unpledged delegates, but you walk around, there were people with little scarves.
And ceasefire pins.
Yeah, and the scarves were of keffiyeh.
This is the sit-in you were at?
Yeah, no, this was inside the convention hall. The scarves will be of, Palestinian
Keffiyeh material, yeah.
So, I think that we probably make a mistake by thinking that the unpledged delegates and the ones doing a sit-in, and maybe even the pent-up people who are cheering for the Palestinian sections of the speech, are in the same movement as many of these people on the outside. Because to be in the convention, they all said, we believe in America, we believe in change within the system. And the people outside the convention do not.
Right.
They have a shared enemy. The enemy is Israel, but they don't agree on America.